Welcome back to News Talk on Samar News. All right, so today we are diving deep into all the global reaction to this tense meeting between Trump and Zelensky. It's been making headlines all over the world.
It really has.
And yeah, it all went down March 1st, 2025.
Yeah.
So pretty recently.
Very recently.
And the fallout, I mean, it could have a major impact on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war.
It could.
So get ready. We're going to unpack some serious international relations today and see how this whole diplomatic drama might play out.
What I think is so fascinating about this is that it's a single meeting in the Oval Office.
Right.
That can expose these deep cracks that are in the international community.
Yeah.
Especially during, like you said, such a sensitive time in the war.
Yeah, it was definitely a public break from what we expect as diplomatic norms. I mean, Trump openly criticized Zelensky, accused him of not being thankful for U.S. support, even questioned his commitment to peace and accused him of disrespecting the U.S. I mean, I've never seen anything quite like it.
It's very unusual for disagreements between world leaders to spill out into the open like this. Usually these kinds of tensions are managed behind closed doors. So the fact that this happens so publicly and during an active conflict, that's a significant departure from typical diplomatic protocol.
So how did the rest of the world react to this very public spat? I mean, it seems like European leaders, for the most part, they're rallying around Zelensky.
They are. We saw strong statements of support from key figures in the EU, like von der Leyen and Costa.
Right.
They assured Zelensky that he's not alone in this.
Yeah.
Even using phrases like, be strong, be brave, be fearless. We will continue working with you for a just and lasting peace.
Wow.
So it's a clear signal that they're standing by Ukraine.
Yeah, but it seems like some of these statements go beyond just showing support. It's almost like they're sending a subtle message to the U.S. like, hey, even if you waver, we're still committed to Ukraine.
You're picking up on a critical nuance here.
Okay.
This incident has raised concerns about a potential shift in the transatlantic alliance, which, is that bedrock partnership between North America and Europe.
Yeah.
Some European leaders, they're worried that the U.S. might be retreating from its traditional leadership role.
Right.
Particularly when it comes to supporting Ukraine.
And those concerns seem to be pretty explicit in statements from leaders like Estonia's Kallas.
Yeah, Kallas has been very vocal, even questioning U.S. leadership directly.
Wow.
She's called for Europe to step up and take on more responsibility for its own security.
It seems like she's not pulling any punches.
No.
Yeah.
And her statements are particularly significant because they tap into this ongoing debate about burden sharing within NATO.
Oh, okay.
So the concern is that if the U.S. reduces its commitment, European countries will have to shoulder a much larger share of the responsibility for defending their own territory.
So it's not just about this one incident. It's about the potential for a much larger shift in the balance of power.
Exactly.
Both within NATO and on the global stage.
And then you have someone like Macron in France, who's taking a different but equally pointed approach.
Okay.
He's been very clear in labeling Russia the aggressor in this conflict.
Right.
He's even warned against actions that could play into Putin's hands, saying if anyone is playing at World War III, it's Vladimir Putin.
It sounds like he's trying to very carefully frame the narrative around this whole situation.
He's absolutely trying to control the narrative. By emphasizing Russia's role as the aggressor, he's trying to solidify international support for Ukraine and deter any attempts to appease Putin. It's a strategic move to maintain pressure on Russia and prevent any weakening of the resolve against them.
Okay, so you have some taking a more measured approach, like Macron.
Right?
And then you have others, like Kallas, who are really kind of,
Calling it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like Germany is also standing firm in its support for Ukraine, with strong statements coming from Merz, Scholz, and Baerbock. But not everyone in Europe is on the same page here.
That's right. Hungary's Orban is a notable outlier.
Yeah, he actually thanked Trump for standing bravely for peace, which, I mean, that's pretty different from what we're hearing from most other European leaders.
It is.
What's going on there?
Well, Orban's position is particularly interesting because of his close ties to both Trump and Putin.
Oh, wow.
So it raises questions about what's truly motivating his stance. Is it genuine agreement with Trump's perspective on the conflict? Or is it a calculated move to strengthen his relationships with these two very powerful figures?
Yeah.
Or is he seeking some sort of economic or political advantage by aligning himself with them? It's a complex situation with a lot of potential interpretations.
It's definitely a lot to unpack. And it seems like some leaders are pushing for more concrete action in response to this whole situation.
Yes.
Even beyond just statements of support. I'm thinking of Meloni in Italy, who's calling for a summit to address the Ukraine crisis head-on.
Yes, this highlights the urgency that many leaders are feeling. They recognize that this spat between Trump and Zelensky has the potential to further destabilize the region and escalate the conflict.
Right.
They see a summit as a way to bring all the key players to the table and try to find a diplomatic solution before things spiral out of control.
But what about Russia itself? I imagine they're watching all of this very closely. What kind of reactions are we seeing from them?
You're right. Russia is definitely paying attention. And as you might expect, some of their responses have been, well, less than diplomatic. For example, Medvedev, who's known for his provocative statements, called Zelensky a cocaine clown.
Oh, wow. That's pretty harsh, even for Medvedev. It looks like he's trying to de-escalate the situation.
Medvedev's comments are often seen as a reflection of Putin's more hardline stance. He frequently uses inflammatory rhetoric to try and undermine Ukraine's leadership and sow discord among their allies. So while his language might be shocking, it's unfortunately not surprising given his role and his history of such statements.
But it's not just the rhetoric that's concerning. Some Russian analysts are actually viewing this whole situation as a potential turning point. I mean, Dmitriev, for example, called the Trump-Zelensky Spat historic.
Yeah.
Suggests that they see this as a significant development that could work in their favor.
Dmitriev's assessment is particularly noteworthy because it suggests that Russia might see this as an opportunity to exploit potential cracks in Western unity.
Yeah.
They could interpret this as a sign that the U.S. is wavering in its support for Ukraine, which might embolden them to take a more aggressive stance in the conflict.
So we've got Europe grappling with this diplomatic earthquake, Russia potentially seeing an opening. What about the rest of the world? Where do countries like the UK and other key U.S. allies stand on all of this?
Well, it seems like the UK, along with several other countries, are still firmly in Zelensky's corner.
Okay.
Starmer in the UK has offered unwavering support and is even planning to host Zelensky in the near future.
That's a strong signal of support.
It is.
Yeah, it suggests that despite the tensions with the U.S., there's still a significant international coalition standing behind Ukraine.
Exactly, and we're seeing similar messages of support coming from Canada, Denmark, and Sweden, among others.
Right.
This suggests that the global rally around Ukraine is still quite strong, even with this public disagreement between Trump and Zelensky.
So amidst all this international fallout, what about Zelensky himself? I mean, he sat down for an interview with Bret Baier on Fox News just hours after that tense Oval Office meeting. I'd love to hear your take on how he's navigating this incredibly complex situation.
That interview was incredibly insightful. It really gave us a glimpse into Zelensky's mindset and the delicate balancing act he's trying to pull off.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, what struck me was his uncertainty about whether the confrontation with Trump was planned. He used phrases like, "I don't know," and "I think," which suggests a level of surprise and perhaps even a bit of confusion about what had just transpired.
It must be incredibly difficult to be blindsided like that, especially by a key ally during a time of war. What else stood out to you from that interview?
He acknowledged that the meeting was not good, but he refused to apologize. It seems like he's trying to walk this very fine line between affirming his stance and defending Ukraine's interests without alienating the U.S., which is still a critical ally in this conflict.
Right, he's in an incredibly difficult position.
He is.
But on top of all of that, he's also facing potential pushback from within the U.S. itself. Can't forget about Senator Lindsey Graham's controversial suggestion that Zelensky should either apologize or resign.
Graham's comments definitely add another layer of complexity to this already tangled situation.
Yeah.
They highlight the growing tensions within the U.S. regarding continued support for Ukraine. It suggests that the bipartisan consensus that we've seen for much of the war might be fracturing, with some lawmakers questioning the level of U.S. involvement.
So it's not just about managing international relations. Zelensky's also having to navigate the shifting political landscape within the U.S. itself. This one meeting seems to have unleashed a cascade of challenges for him.
Absolutely. It's a high-stakes game of diplomacy and politics, and the stakes just got even higher.
All right, so we've got this international incident with shockwaves rippling across the globe, a divided Europe, and a Ukrainian president caught in the crosshairs. But what about the U.S. itself? How is this playing out on the domestic front? And how is this deep partisan divide shaping the conversation?
Well, as you might expect, the U.S. political landscape is deeply divided on this issue. We're seeing a stark partisan split in the reactions, with Democrats condemning Trump's actions and Republicans largely defending him.
Right.
It's become a highly charged issue that's further fueling the existing political polarization in the country.
And that partisan divide is being amplified by some pretty strong accusations being thrown around. Schumer, for example, is accusing Trump and Vance of doing Putin's dirty work. That's a serious accusation. It really speaks to the intensity of the debate.
Schumer's statement is a prime example of how this incident has become a political football in the U.S. It's no longer just about U.S. foreign policy or support for Ukraine.
Right.
It's become entangled with domestic political rivalries, which makes finding common ground and developing a cohesive strategy even more difficult.
It's like this event has poured gasoline on an already raging fire. The question is, where does it go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, and I think to really understand the potential trajectory of this situation, we need to take a closer look at Zelensky's perspective and delve deeper into the U.S. political landscape.
Okay, so we've established that this Trump-Zelensky meeting has really thrown a wrench into the works, both internationally and domestically.
Yeah.
But beyond the immediate reactions and all the political posturing, what does this all actually mean for the average person? How does this high-stakes diplomatic drama, how does it translate into real-world consequences?
That's a really crucial question. And it is easy to get lost in the headlines and all the political back and forth. But the truth is, this incident has the potential to create a ripple effect that impacts, all of us.
Right.
On a very practical level, it could influence things like, economic aid to Ukraine,
Right.
military support, and even the willingness of other countries to stand up to Russia.
So this isn't just about political maneuvering. This has the potential to actually shift the balance of power in the region with real consequences for people in Ukraine and beyond.
Exactly. And it also raises broader questions about the future of global alliances and the role of the U.S. on the world stage. If the U.S. continues to pull back from its traditional leadership role, who steps in to fill that void?
Right.
And what does that mean for global stability and security?
That's a pretty sobering thought. It makes you wonder what happens to the idea of a unified international response to aggression if these key alliances start to fracture. Does this embolden other authoritarian leaders? Does it make the world a more dangerous place?
These are all critical questions that we need to grapple with. And I think it's important as you process all of this information to recognize that you have a role to play in this as well.
Yeah.
Being informed, engaging in these thoughtful discussions, and holding our leaders accountable, these are all essential steps in navigating this increasingly complex and uncertain landscape.
So this isn't just a spectator sport. We're all participants in this global drama, whether we realize it or not.
Right.
And the choices we make, the actions we take, and the voices we raise can have a real impact on the course of events.
That's a powerful realization. It can be easy to feel overwhelmed or powerless in the face of such large-scale events, but it's crucial to remember that we have agency. We can make a difference, but it all starts with understanding the issues, engaging in critical thinking, and taking informed action.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the international fallout from the Trump-Zelensky spat, analyzed the reactions from key players, and delved into the potential consequences for Ukraine, the U.S., and the world. But I think we need to zoom back in on the U.S. political landscape and unpack how these divisions could impact the U.S. response to the ongoing crisis in Ukraine.
That's a critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
As we've touched on, this incident has really exposed the fault lines in American politics. It's essential to understand how those divisions are shaping the debate and influencing policy decisions.
We've already discussed the partisan split in reactions, with Democrats largely condemning Trump's actions and Republicans mostly defending him. But I'm curious to hear more about the specific arguments being made on each side of the aisle. What are the key points of contention, and how are they framing the issue?
On the Democratic side, there's widespread outrage over Trump's treatment of Zelensky.
Right.
They view it as a betrayal of a key ally and a dangerous concession to Putin.
Okay.
They're accusing him of undermining U.S. national security and emboldening Russia's aggression.
And they're certainly not mincing words. I mean, we already heard Schumer's pointed accusation that Trump and Vance are doing Putin's dirty work, and other Democrats are echoing those sentiments. They're framing this as a clear case of Trump siding with a dictator over a democratically elected leader. It's a pretty stark moral contrast.
Absolutely. And beyond the immediate implications for Ukraine, they're also deeply concerned about the long-term damage this incident could do to America's reputation on the world stage. They argue that it undermines U.S. credibility and weakens its ability to lead on global issues.
So for the Democrats, this is about more than just Ukraine. It's about upholding the fundamental principles of American foreign policy, the importance of standing up for democracy, maintaining strong alliances, and projecting American power and leadership on the global stage.
Exactly. They see this incident as a fundamental betrayal of those values and a dangerous departure from the norms of U.S. foreign policy. They view it as a threat to American leadership and a gift to its adversaries.
But what about the Republicans? How are they justifying or defending Trump's actions? What arguments are they making in response to these accusations?
The Republican response has been more nuanced. While some have openly defended Trump's actions, others are taking a more cautious approach. Some are focusing on the need for Ukraine to be more grateful for U.S. support and to take more responsibility for its own defense.
So they're essentially echoing Trump's complaints about Zelensky not being thankful enough. It seems to be a way of shifting the focus away from Trump's behavior and onto Ukraine's perceived shortcomings.
Yes, there's an effort to reframe the narrative. They argue that the U.S. has already provided a significant amount of aid to Ukraine and that it's time for other countries, particularly those in Europe, to step up their contributions. They see this as a matter of fairness and burden sharing.
And this line of argument seems to tap into a broader sentiment within the Republican Party. This growing sense of fatigue with foreign interventions and a desire to focus more on domestic issues. It's that America First ideology that Trump championed during his presidency.
You're hitting on a key point. That America First ideology continues to hold sway over a significant portion of the Republican base, and it's profoundly influencing their views on foreign policy issues like the war in Ukraine. There's a growing sense that the U.S. has been too involved in conflicts around the world and that it's time to pull back and prioritize American interests.
So it seems like we're witnessing this fundamental clash of worldviews.
We are?
Yeah, with Democrats emphasizing the importance of global engagement and supporting democracy abroad, while some Republicans are advocating for a more restrained foreign policy focused on American interests and a more limited role in international affairs.
And that clash is playing out vividly in the debate over Ukraine.
Right.
It's shaping the level of support for continued U.S. involvement in the conflict, and it could have a significant impact on the course of events. This divide makes it incredibly challenging to develop a consistent and effective U.S. foreign policy strategy, especially in a crisis like this.
This helps put things into perspective. It's not just about who's right or wrong. It's about understanding the deep-seated ideological differences that are driving these positions and the potential consequences of those decisions for both Ukraine and the U.S.
Exactly. And it underscores the need for informed citizens who can see beyond the partisan rhetoric and engage in thoughtful dialogue about these complex issues. Foreign policy isn't just something that happens in Washington, D.C.
Right.
It affects all of us, and it's vital to be informed and engaged in the conversation.
So we've explored the immediate fallout, the international reactions, and even the potential consequences for Ukraine and the U.S. But stepping back for a moment, it feels like this whole situation, it's about so much more than just this one meeting.
I think you're absolutely right. This Trump-Zelensky spat, while it's dramatic in itself, it's really a symptom of a much larger shift that's happening on the global stage. We're seeing old alliances strain, new power dynamics are emerging,
Right.
and there's just a growing sense of uncertainty about what the future holds.
It's like we've zoomed in on this one event, but it's giving us this panoramic view of the entire geopolitical landscape, and it's a landscape that's in flux.
Exactly. And as you continue to follow this situation, I think it's crucial to consider the long-term implications of this potential shift in global power.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean for, everyday people?
Right.
How will this affect our lives, even if we're thousands of miles away from the conflict?
That's a great point. It's easy to think of these geopolitical shifts as just abstract concepts, but they have very real consequences. We've talked about the potential for a weakened transatlantic alliance, for example.
Right.
But what does that actually mean on a practical level?
Yeah.
How might it impact things like trade, economic stability, or even, the risk of conflict in other parts of the world?
These are the questions that policymakers and analysts are really grappling with right now.
Yeah.
But they're not just academic exercises. These issues, they have the potential to impact all of us.
Right.
Whether it's through economic instability, shifting alliances, or even the threat of conflict spreading to other regions.
It's a sobering reminder that we're not just watching this drama unfold on the world stage. We're all interconnected.
We are.
And the decisions made by our leaders, the actions we take as citizens, they have very real consequences.
Precisely. And that brings us to a final and perhaps the most important question for you to consider as you reflect on all of this. What role do you want to play in shaping this evolving global landscape?
Yeah, it's such a powerful question. We're not just passengers on this ride. We have the ability to inform ourselves, to engage in dialogue, to hold our leaders accountable, and even to influence the course of events. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Stay engaged, stay curious, and never underestimate your ability to make a difference.